can, and be wary of broad claims in the area at this point. But be excited about co-innovating with suppliers, but don't anticipate that it's all figured out at this point.
I think great insight provision there from you on just the volumes of data that these systems typically need to sort of learn and chew on, often much bigger than the volumes of data that we have access to in the sort of learning space. So you may need to look broader for those sources of data.
Yeah, exactly.
Couple of things. Let's look at things from the viewpoint of your buyer, of my peers and learning leaders in the organization. All of this complex and rapid change going on in the learning and development space, and all this shift going on in the provider space with all these kind of new small companies popping up. What's the right mix between innovation and agility and sort of delivering quality for the long term? We used to call this the kind of the best of breed versus the sort of platform approach. What's your advice around that, Sam?
Well, I mean, not surprisingly, I come at it from an ecosystem view, and but I will say, kind of making some smart relatively long-term, at the pace of change right now, bets around foundational platforms is important. You're going to need somewhere that you're going to make sense of learner data and reporting administration, and then you'll want to look at your learning experience layer, your program delivery, your content, other types of tools that can fill that experience layer of your ecosystem, and those I think should be easily testable and pilotable. And once proven, you can then build your integrations between them, and they can become, kind of core elements of your stack in learning technology. But I think you have organizations that have a lot of room to experiment and pilot, and with cloud services, it's not that hard. And honestly, I think organizations think it's harder than it is. It really isn't that hard to try a pilot.
Yeah, this is that's good. So this sort of iterative approach, moving quickly and innovating, and to innovate and try and test, and then sort of build into the platform as you feel comfortable that you can create and add value, is a good approach. But the shift to a service model where I don't have to buy and install the software that I use for a program. What's the role of corporate IT in all that? I know a lot of learning leaders have a sort of mixed point of view around how and when to involve their corporate IT groups, and what's the safe thing to do, what's the right thing to do, and what's the agile thing to do. How do you think learning leaders, from your perspective, should work with their internal technical teams when they're talking to an external provider?
Yeah. I think back to 15, 20 years ago, and the conversation was about this, how does learning talk to IT has been going on forever. But something that's changed pretty substantially is that learning leaders relied on IT to get very hands-on and support their on-prem learning systems, and there's a lot there. And with cloud services, that's in many respects gone away. But IT is going to be very concerned with things like security, managing budgets effectively, not having redundant spend, or what they consider redundant spend, and creating a compelling user experience across applications. So I think what it means for learning leaders is they need to have a very clear point of view and a compelling business strategy around what the ecosystem is that they want to build and why. And it needs to be differentiated. And if they're kind of muddled in their strategy or their response for learning leaders, they're going to get responses like, well, that sounds like something our LMS can do. Why don't we use our existing collaboration software for that? I don't understand how this is any different. And they'll get hammered on, we're not going to bring in another system. I'm not going to support the integrations. I don't have time to do the security review. So it requires the learning leader to be well-educated, thoughtful, and also to educate IT, which of course is got to do that thoughtfully.
Yeah. So just to sort of summarize there, you're saying absolutely involve your IT department for all the right reasons, security, privacy, as well as other factors, but do that with a really clear kind of long-term roadmap from your own perspective.
That's right, and be clear on why you need something. You should be clear on that anyway. I mean, you shouldn't be bringing something in that's not differentiated. But especially so when you're trying to convince a party that in some ways their interests are not totally aligned. Their interests are, let's minimize the number of new systems we're bringing in. Let's make my job easier, not have more, potentials for security breaches and so on. So you gotta focus on that value and that differentiation.
I want to dig just a little bit deeper on this one because it's so many people that we talk to struggle with this topic. They're sort of it can be very, very difficult to bring new technology into your world, and sometimes I think it puts learning leaders off experimenting and trying things. Is there any sort of bad practice that you would talk to? Is there a sort of wrong way to go about this that you would warn people on?
That's a good question. I might. I guess it's sort of in some ways the answer with the inverse of what I described, but it's maybe running too quickly into a pilot without thinking about why it's different and why it's needed. Actually, I would start with kind of just the general advice of starting with the biggest business problem you can find in the organization and how this technology is 100% aligned to that. Right. I know I'm not giving you things to avoid. I'm just suggesting what people should do. But oftentimes, and you and I have talked about this before, Chris, too, like it seems like CLOs sometimes in this context of learning experience, they kind of abdicate their responsibility. They just say, well, I've brought in this learning experience platform, I've brought in this content library, so we're good, right? Like I've done everything I need to do. Well, no, you need to be focused on what is that thing that's keeping Satya up at night, or executive X up at night, and how am I going to solve that? And what tools do I need to do that? That's really the frame to look at it through.
I think that's great. I think that's really clear advice. It's like know the problem you're trying to solve, and then all the decisions that get made around technology are either going to help that or they're not. Right? It's a good way to think about it. Yeah. Can we go a little broader now? I've kind of just from your role as kind of an observer and of what's going on in the corporate learning space. Here at the Learning Futures Group, we're sort of building a career out of what we think is a bit of an identity crisis at the moment of corporate learning teams. Skills and capability is now such a hot topic amongst business leaders, and we're not sure in the learning and development space how capable we are at solving some of these really big problems. And I'm talking about, the shift to the gig economy, the disruptive effect of technology on jobs, the ability to retrain people at scale, and these big macro problems that certainly top CEOs and government organizations are thinking about. What are you sensing that crisis as well? What's the top of mind for the chief learning officers that you and your team are talking to, Sam?
Yeah, I think the best are thinking about what we just were talking about in terms of solving the big problems atop their CEO's agenda. Maybe they're one click down from the societal challenges of gig economy, and it's like how does that manifest in this particular company's workforce or customer base or so on. So they're getting like it's maybe one click down in terms of the breadth there, right? It's a little bit more focused. So it's showing up as things like, how do I build a product innovation pipeline for my company? How do I transform my skills to sell the cloud? How do I retain critical healthcare talent? How do I build a mindset, a growth mindset? Those sorts of things. And the best learning leaders are also thinking about how am I going to do that while making that compelling for my learners and for my audience. How do I make it really a compelling proposition for them? And I guess, like I mentioned, the thing I worry about a little bit is that small bore thinking, like it's or maybe the old wine and new wineskins kind of challenge, or like, hey, I had content in catalog X, now I've got video content in catalog Y, so it's like no, we need to be thinking at a bigger level about the biggest challenges in the organization, if not the societal challenges, which that is I think those are becoming increasingly relevant for the chief learning officer as well.
Yeah, it's certainly an interesting time to be in the role.
Absolutely.
Finally, Sam, got time for one last question, and really appreciate your time. But we like to ask our guests to share some inspiration or offer a personal perspective that we think helps with the community. I don't know about you, but many people that I talk to, who work in the learning space, to get something, sort of agree there's something special about it. Can you talk about your own relationship to learning, and was there a time or a person or a specific experience that inspired you to follow the work path that you followed?
Yeah, I mean, as a kind of going full circle back to my introduction, like I'm not an MBA. I'm not I didn't do a doctorate in education or education technology or kind of those obvious paths to kind of some of my role today. But I have always been a voracious learner, and there are many influences, of course. But it's a great question, and a couple of professors come to mind. One was when I was at Yale, studied with this eminent labor historian named David Montgomery, and he brought the world of labor and work alive as a really exciting chapter in U.S. history. And I learned about the power of individual stories and people to shape the future. And that was, I can still recall his booming voice as he would lecture and kind of personify some character in history. Uh-huh. And then in grad school, it was Catholic social teaching and reading papal encyclicals and thinking about the dignity of work. And that has always been a touch point for me. And then as just an experience, Chris, you and I both have a connection to Spain. As you know, I walked part of the Camino de Santiago up in northern Spain. And I think from that experience, I learned that if you slow down, you notice this kind of amazing bounty that surrounds us in life and how much we have to be grateful for. And also, I think that's where the hope comes in. Like, I mean, we have all these kinds of challenges around us, but oftentimes if we get discouraged, it's because we're running too fast, and we need to kind of slow down and look at all the possibilities and the amazing things that surround us. So we have a lot to be grateful for, and a lot we can contribute, and that's what we try to do every day.
Awesome, Sam. Very, very inspirational, and comes as no surprise to me in how you approach your work and the sort of fidelity and hopefulness that you sort of bring to your work. It's very evident. So thanks. We're at time, and I really want to thank you, Sam, for your insights today. On a personal note, I want to thank you for the great support that Intrepid is giving the Learning Futures Group. It's really fun to work with you guys. You're a positive influencer for change, and we value that partnership. So thanks for your time, Sam. Could you share with people where they can learn a little bit more about you and your work? Where can we send people to get more resources on what you and Intrepid do?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. And likewise, we really appreciate the collaboration with Learning Futures Group. The easiest way is to just visit our website at www.intrepidlearning.com, and we will be. Don't be shocked if you see a facelift if you come today or tomorrow, and then a few weeks from now